I think the thing that upsets me the most is that it's not just products that are being marketed to children, but values. And the primary value that's being sold to kids over and over and over again is the value that things or stuff or brands will make us happy.
Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and in my last few videos I've been interrogating conspiracy theories and propaganda. And while the issues that I mentioned are no doubt quite bad, there is possibly a bigger propaganda issue that shaped my entire life. And that's the issue of the proliferation of advertising to children, which really kicked off just before I was born. In this video, I'm going to be heavily citing the 2008 documentary, Consuming Kids, The Commercialization of Childhood. I have some issues with this documentary because I feel like it doesn't do an amazing job of explaining in concrete scientific terms exactly why advertising to children is such a profound issue, as well as making it sound as though the issues they discuss are unique to children's advertising, when they aren't. In this essay, I'm going to do my best to address these two concerns, but first, here's some history on the problem.
Advertising to kids may have been confined during the 70s, but it was during this period that it would come into its own as an industry, triggering a counter-movement to end youth marketing altogether, and setting in motion a series of policy decisions that would ultimately determine the industry's future.
A seminal event was in the late 70s when the Federal Trade Commission advocated a ban on advertising to children 8 and under.
The Federal Trade Commission staff believes that children are deceived by television advertising, particularly commercials for cereal with sugar in it, and it wants to stop all advertising aimed at young children.
This ban was based in part on concern about sugar cereals and cavities, and also based on research that indicated that children 8 and under did not understand the persuasive intent of advertising.
Are you saying that every message directed to the older child, a child between 8 and 12, is inherently deceptive?
That's right. I think the child cannot bring enough information to bear not to be deceived and to have an unfair trade practice.
So what ended up happening was the industries that were going to be affected, the toy industries, the sugar cereal companies, went to Congress.
And that in an American democratic capitalistic society, we all must learn, top to bottom, to care for ourselves. And what the last thing we need in the next 20 years is a national nanny.
And Congress ended up taking away a lot of the FTC's authority to regulate marketing to children.
Far from addressing consumer advocates' concerns about the impact of advertising on kids, in 1980, Congress passed the FTC Improvement Act. The law mandated that the FTC would no longer have any authority to promulgate any rules regarding children's advertising.
The reason that's never well addressed in this video as to why that's such a bad thing involves a process known as neurogenesis.
Marketers know these are little sponges. They're so wide open. They want to get that brand loyalty for life because that's big bucks.
Which is the development of neuronal connections, the very wiring of the brain. There are at least 3 phases in life where neurogenesis is rapidly accelerated in human development, with the first obviously being embryonic development. But after being born, it happens primarily in early childhood and late teen years.
There's a lot that's happening around us, and the public is not aware, just like they're not aware of neuromarketing. And that's another whole scary thing, to put a child in an MRI and then watch what is lighting up inside his brain based on the stimulus, and then saying, wow, this works, this is good, look what happened.
This means that the messages that are incorporated into the human mind during these periods are more readily hardwired into the brain. Recent research has suggested that neurogenesis is more active in adults than we first imagined. So there is more of a chance than I had thought that we would be able to deprogram or reprogram ourselves in adulthood. But even considering that, childhood is still the time in our lives where our minds are most influenceable. Additionally, we have been learning how powerful a driving force like nostalgia can be throughout our lives, and how powerfully it can be used within advertising.
Not since the end of World War II, at the height of the baby boom, have there been so many kids in our midst. There are now more than 52 million kids under 12 in all in the United States. the biggest burst in the U.S. youth population in half a century. And for American business, these kids have come to represent the ultimate prize. An unprecedented, powerful, and elusive new demographic to be cut up and captured at all costs. There's no doubt that marketers have their sights on kids because of their increasing buying power, the amount of money they now spend on everything from clothes to music to electronics, totaling some $40 billion every year. But perhaps a bigger reason for marketers' interest in kids may be the amount of adult spending that American kids under 12 now directly influence, an astronomical $700 billion a year, roughly the equivalent of the combined economies of the world's 115 poorest countries.
One economic impact of children is the money that they themselves spend. The money that they get from their parents or grandparents, the money that they get as allowance when they get older, the money that they earn themselves. That is an increasingly significant amount of money. But that's not where the real money is. Marketers and advertisers have realized that the real money related to the children's market is in their purchasing influence.
Any questions? Jared, does he do any tricks? Does that work for you?
Somebody asked me, Lucy, is that ethical? You're essentially manipulating these children. Well, yeah, is it ethical? I don't know. But our role at Initiative is to move products. And if we know you move products with a certain creative execution, placed in a certain type of media vehicle, then we've done our job.
So first, it should be said that we need to restore the regulations on advertising to children, because it's quite apparent how much damage has been done by removing them. But I think that the US government might have a larger role to play here. But to explain how and why, we have to take a look at the media empires that have been built on the back of this deregulation. For example, let's look at Nickelodeon. Without children's advertising in its many forms, it's pretty difficult to imagine how a channel like this could be profitable. Non-subscription channels like this rely on advertising to remain profitable, so any meaningful limit on that would jeopardize their very existence, as well as the existence of other channels aimed at younger audiences like Cartoon Network and more, perhaps even forcing them into a subscription model, where they would logically have to advertise to get subscribers. You see the problem here, right? Advertising is baked into the model of children's television. So how could we leverage the power of the US government to fill this gap and make children's television less awful? I assume you have some familiarity with the concept of modern monetary theory, and if not, I have a brief primer that I will link to in the description, as well as a longer explanation when it becomes available. In relation to propaganda, advertising is king, and advertising to children is about as akin to brainwashing as advertising really can get on a functional level.
This is new consumer science, and it's yielding a new science of childhood. And perhaps nowhere else have the different elements of this science merged so seamlessly as in the Girls' Intelligence Agency.
Not the CIA, it's the Girls' Intelligence Agency, which, for all the cloak and dagger, is actually a marketing firm.
The Girls' Intelligence Agency claims to have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of girls across the country that it is in contact with and working with. The signature product of the GIA is something called the Slumber Party in a Box.
Guys, sacred opening of the cake.
Kids are asked to sort of push a certain product, or they're more like focus group parties where kids are asked to come and give their opinions on products.
What is the hottest item? The sleep mask, the fuzzy phone, or the beauty kits? Fuzzy phone.
The marketing industry spin is that it's all up to parents, and that parents should be the sole gatekeepers.
What about their parents, though?
The parents are responsible for the conduct of the child.
Anything a child does.
Isn't it a parent's responsibility?
Isn't it the parents' responsibility to monitor what their kids are reading and watching?
Isn't the choice of what to buy and feed kids up to parents, ultimately?
Parents can't cope with this alone. They need help. We have a $15 billion industry that is working day and night to undermine parental authority.
Responsible adults would say that, of course, parents are responsible. But if children are not with their parents 24 hours a day if they're in school, and the school is full of advertising and marketing. If they go to daycare and the daycare center is full of advertising and marketing. If someone's inviting them over to a slumber party and there's a surreptitious selling or market research going on there, I think it's asking an awful lot of parents to take all the responsibility. It's akin to an owner of a large fleet of trucks announcing that our fleet of trucks from now on is going to be barreling down the road, especially where children are, at 150 miles an hour. Parents, watch out. It's your job to take care that your children don't get hurt. No one would argue in that case that the owner of the fleet of trucks doesn't bear any responsibility at all.
So if we used government funds to replace most of the advertising on children's networks with informational or even educational content, something like the famous Got Milk campaign, but backed in science and education and not a lobbying effort. Understanding the limits of MMT, this would be shockingly easy. Ad space on a network like this is certainly a finite resource, but it's not something that's likely to cause general inflation if the supply of it is diminished. It's also just replacing the funding for this channels, so it's not like they'll suddenly have more money in their pockets to create additional market demand with. So we seem to be safe on this end as well. It allows us to reach children with important messaging when it will affect them the most, making it a good time to talk to them about media literacy and critical thinking. Of course, we need to be careful with how we allow this power to be used. There's certainly the opportunity for an authoritarian government to use a channel's legal dependency on them for income to make some really scary mandates about their programming, which is why I'd like for there to be a certain amount of a private market here as well, so that channels never feel wholly dependent on government funds for their survival. But really, could we do much worse than the consumer indoctrination that's rampant in the ad breaks in these channels now? That said, unfortunately, the actual ads are only a small part of the larger issue this documentary digs into. The sad thing is, I'm not even sure I can imagine a world where there might be a way to really solve these problems under capitalism, without a major cultural shift that might be even more unlikely than abandoning capitalism at this point. It's worth watching for a better understanding of the scope of the problem than the clips I'm showing you in this video, but since it's already 12 years old, I'd like to finish this out by talking a bit about how some of these unfortunate trends have expanded in the decade following its release. A lot of the issues mentioned in this film seem like, in retrospect, they're only seeing the tip of the iceberg when looking at them from 2020. And 3 of them happen to intertwine in a single example. These would be cell phones, toy ads, and kids marketing to other kids. In my personal life, I used to babysit an 8-year-old boy to help make ends meet. And there was a period in this time where he got hooked on YouTube toy reviews. As a person trying to make quality, informative content on the platform, it was a bit shocking and disconcerting to see how many views these channels got to just sit kids in front of a camera and have them open and play with toys. These were in some cases the equivalent of hour-long toy ads, and he got addicted fast. And when I say addicted, I mean turning off the TV would cause a really visceral reaction and outright temper tantrum. At first I thought they were harmless, but I started to notice his rapt attention and realized that something scary was happening right before my eyes. I hate to admit this, but he was a rambunctious child, and honestly having something like this to keep his attention made my job a lot easier. But after the first few hours, I was ready to put my foot down and accept that this had to stop, even if it made my job a lot harder. Thankfully, I was able to get his parent on board with helping me curb this addiction, and over time it wasn't a problem anymore. But it certainly was scary to see how fast the kid got hooked on what was effectively native advertising done by a family trying to make an easy living, and it was also scary to imagine how I might react as an overworked parent if I were to find such an easy out. So, given that, and imagining how prevalent such a thing might be in a world where working multiple jobs is increasingly a norm for the working class, was terrifying. And I didn't have to imagine. As I said before, it was right there in the metrics. Though, for this problem, there might be a workable solution to work in tandem with regulations limiting children's advertising. This would be the congressional act that scared YouTubers like myself only a year ago, COPPA. And while it isn't designed to act in such a way as to limit this type of insidious advertisement, it's not particularly hard to imagine how it could be used in such a way in the future. If you are still watching the video at this point, I'd like to take the time to ask you to check out the following channels, which, like my own, have not reached 1,000 subscribers yet. And if you're not subscribed to this channel, hit that button, ring that bell, do the YouTube stuff. And in an effort to keep this channel ad-free into the future, I would also ask that if you appreciate the content I'm putting out here, that you could go over to my Patreon, or even for a one-time donation, my Ko-fi page, and send me a little bit of money to help me make ends meet in a year that has been troubling the hell out of everyone.